Hi, I'm Scott Geitler, the owner of Bluewater Photo and Travel, and today I'm going to talk about the essential things you need to know about your wet wide-angle lens. All the tips I'm going to give you are generic to all wet wide-angle lenses. This is an example of one, a UWL09 wide-angle lens on a Fantasy a 6300, 6500 housing, but the tips I'm going to give you are going to be valid for pretty much any wet wide-angle lens that you're going to use. So you ordered your wet wide-angle lens, it comes in the mail. What is important to know? It turns out that there's a lot of things that are important. First of all, the shade. If you don't have the shade aligned correctly, you're going to see the shade in your photo, and don't feel bad, it happens to a lot of people. So the large part of the shade, it's important to have in the 12 o'clock in the 6 o'clock position. And then if there's a small part of the shade, that's what you want in the 3 and the 9 o'clock position. So it's important to have this shade exactly in that position when your lens is on tight. And if you need to move this shade, usually for most wide-angle lenses, it'll come with a very small Allen wrench, and you can adjust these screws and move your shade around. But it's very, again, I can't stress enough, it's very important to have your lens shade, the large lens shade at the top and bottom of the wide-angle lens. Second of all, when you get your new wide-angle lens and you test it, the results on land and underwater are going to be very different. You may see part of the shade or the lens on land, and often underwater that will go away because everything's magnified underwater. So if you test it, it's important to test it in the ocean or the pool or a sink or a bucket. Not only do you want water all the way around your lens, but when you go in a dive, you also want to burp your lens. And what does that mean? That means that you, when you get in the water, you take your lens off for a second, you let all the air out in between the lens and the camera. So it's something you want to do every dive. Depending on the setup, some wide-angle lenses will have little holes that automatically burp, others won't. So check with your Bluewater staff members to find out the best way to burp your wide-angle lens. But keep in mind that if you don't do your tests underwater and you don't burp the lens, you will not get the same results as if you have water filling everywhere that it needs to be. Third thing about the wide-angle lenses is that they do come with covers, but these covers are lost very easily. So either make yourself a little lanyard or string so you can tie your cover somewhere so you don't lose it, or when you purchase your lens, get an extra cover. But the covers are very important so your wide-angle lens doesn't get scratched. But keep in mind that even the most diligent photographers will often lose those small wide-angle lens covers. The next thing we're going to talk about is zooming your camera in and out. Now, most wide-angle lenses will work when you're zoomed all the way out, but depending on the setup, you may need to zoom in slightly. Again, it's all going to depend on the camera and wide-angle lens combination. Now, if you zoom in more than a little bit, if your wide-angle lens is not what's called a zoom-through lens, at some point the image is going to get blurry. So keep in mind that most wide-angle lenses are not meant to be used zoomed all the way in, or even halfway. However, we do offer a few zoom-through lenses. They're more expensive, a little heavier, harder to build, but in my opinion, they're definitely worth the money. So when you have your wide-angle lens, it's very important to know if it's a zoom-through or not, and if it's not, what the best position of your zoom is. Is it zoomed all the way out, or is it zoomed in one click? Again, check with the Bluewater staff member that you purchased the lens from. Another thing I want to talk about is aperture. So when you take a photo or video underwater with your new wet wide-angle lens, the best results are often at f5.6 or f8 or f11. If you're shooting wide open, which is the widest aperture possible on your camera, which is often f2.8, don't be surprised if the corners of the photo are a little bit blurry. Not a lot, but definitely shooting at a smaller aperture will help you get a sharper image. Now, speaking of the wide angle lens, if you're going to be taking your lens on and off underwater, you need to have somewhere to put it. Now, there's not always a good place to put your lens. Some people will get a lens holder to put on their arm. Some people will put it in their pocket. Some people will just hold it and they'll build themselves a little lanyard depending on how heavy the lens is. So think about what you're going to do if you're to keep your lens safe when it's not on the camera. Last but not least, we're going to talk about something called vignetting. Vignetting is a term that you hear very often with wide angle lenses, and what that means is that the corners are dark, or you can see the shade, or you can see some of the port in the photo. So the solution to vignetting is it's multiple things. You may not have the right wide angle lens for your camera. You may need to zoom in a little bit more, and if there's only a very, very small amount of vignetting, which is just a tiny drop of black in the corners, I suggest you just use Lightroom or Photoshop and clone that out, and we can show you how to do that. And you're going to get the best images that way. And the reason is the whole purpose of a wide angle lens is to have your photos be as wide as possible. So if there's just a tiny, tiny drop of darkness or black in the corners, that's how I would shoot. If it's a little more than that, check with your salesperson to see if that's normal for your setup. And if it is, you usually just have to zoom in one click. But often when people see a lot of vignetting in the photos, it's because they're not doing the test in water, or because the shade's in the wrong position, or because they haven't burped their lens, or because it's not close enough to the port and on tight enough. So those are all the essential tips you need to know to get the best performance out of your wide angle lens. I hope you found this helpful, and if you have any questions at all, feel free to reach out to us at sales@bluewaterphotostore.com. Thanks, and have a great day.